And welcome to the Go Earn It podcast. It is episode 35. I'm Shane Sparks, joined today by Teague Moore, three-time All-American at Oklahoma State, won the national title as well back in the days of the 118-pound weight class. Longtime coach as well. Teague, looking forward to this one. You ready to scrap?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me on, Shane.
Let's start in high school. You went to North Allegheny High School, two-time state finalist, one-time state champion. I love doing the research and learning different things about you guys in the process of these podcasts. My question is, who beat Teague Moore in high school? Because you were a world beater.
Well, you know him. He was a national champion at Penn State, Jeremy Hunter. And interesting thing about that, we wrestled the 2 weeks prior leading up to the state championships. And I had beaten him both of those previous weekends, but then when we got to the state finals, he got the better of me in an overtime. And so that was my loss my sophomore year, his freshman year.
Pennsylvania high school wrestling is amazing because
Yeah.
you have high school state championship matches where ultimately you got a pair of national champions. It's incredible.
Yeah. I think looking back through the history, I just purchased a really good book from Tom Elling, who did the history of Pennsylvania wrestling. And I was paging through, and it's absolutely incredible over the years and the decades, how many times you see names from the Pennsylvania states that in a few years you see at the NCAA championships and sometimes world championships and Olympics. Pretty good stuff.
What do you remember from winning your state title?
I remember a big sigh of relief. A little bit of context to that. So I'm the youngest of seven kids. My brother just above me, Ty, was a four-time Pennsylvania state champion, only lost once in high school. And so I had big shoes to fill. And I kind of look back on I was a late bloomer, right? I didn't even qualify to the state championships my freshman year. So myself and I think a lot of people around me were wondering what was wrong comparatively to my brother. And then my sophomore year, made it to the state finals. That's where I lost to Jeremy. Junior year, just had a slip up in the first or second round and lost, and then came back for third. And then my senior year, I finally punched through and won it. And honestly, it was a big sigh of relief because I knew I was capable. I had already won multiple junior national championships. So I had national championships behind my name, but I didn't have a Pennsylvania state championship. So that was a big one to overcome.
How did you deal with the pressures of being Ty's younger brother and knocking on the door and falling short? What do you recall from dealing with that?
I didn't deal with it very well. It took into my sophomore year of high school. My dad was the one that actually sat me down because I was struggling. And he just basically said, look, you're not going to be your brother. You need to come up with your own goals and your own expectations. You keep trying to do everything based off what he did. And he said, you're going to be your own person. You're going to be your own wrestler. And so at that time, I reassessed where my goals were, and I really started focusing on freestyle at that time. And shortly thereafter, I won the junior nationals my sophomore year, repeated my junior year, and really started excelling on the freestyle circuit. And as we all know now, the state of Pennsylvania is tough in high school wrestling, and so I was still battling just to get that state title, but I was starting to find success on the freestyle circuit, and that's where Coach Smith at Oklahoma State, that's where he recognized me, and I gravitated towards him at that time because he was just finishing his 1992 Olympic run, and so he was kind of the big name of the time, and had just taken over at Oklahoma State, and so I pursued that option.
What do you remember about your first meeting with John Smith?
Um, it was surreal. Of course, everybody knew who he was, right? And he approached me on the floor at Fargo, and I can't remember correct. It was something to the effect of like I had just finished a match. I was coming off of the mat, and he said, Teague Moore, can I talk to you for a minute?" and introduced himself as, he always does. He's so incredibly humble, John Smith, I'm the coach at Oklahoma State. And I remember just being awestruck, right? So a very, very cool experience. And at that time, my brother Ty was getting coached by Kendall Cross at North Carolina. He was wrestling at UNC. And so I had a little bit of an Oklahoma State connection at that time. And so when Coach Smith started talking about what the opportunities may be at Oklahoma State, I was sold pretty quickly. I still took a visit to Penn State. I was planning on taking a visit to Cornell, but ultimately, once I made my official to Oklahoma State, I made that commitment.
What do you recall from walking in the room those first couple of weeks, first couple of months? I mean, at that time, I mean, that program was the program.
Yeah, we were rocking. We had just come off the national championship in '94. Mark Branch was on the team and was a national champion. Pat Smith had just finished his run. I got there in the fall of '95, and there were big expectations of everyone in the program. And what do I recall about it? I just remember feeling like this is where I needed to be, right? Because so much of the success in that room was celebrated not only with their NCAA championships, the most NCAA team titles of any program in the NCAA, not just wrestling, any sport, all of the individual national champions that had been through the Oklahoma State program. And then when I looked at the world champions and Olympic champions, that's where I was aspiring to go. So I just felt like I needed to be there. And Eric Guerrero and I were roommates at that time at the beginning of our freshman year. So I had a roommate and a teammate that he clobbered me every day. I mean, he really, when I needed tested, Eric did that for me every single day. He always was able to show me where the bar needed to be set and really helped drive me to that national championship and my All-American titles.
As a true freshman at Oklahoma State, who was one veteran that made the biggest impact on you in the way that he went about his business day in, day out?
The first I would say is Mark Branch, just because he stood out to me the most because he had the title and he was on the team, right? So um, that in his work ethic was there. I mean, all of the guys in the program at that time, their work ethic was absolutely phenomenal. Steven Schmidt, who was a multiple time All-American for us, and his senior year ranked number one in the country, but unfortunate an injury prior to the national championships really took that opportunity away from him that senior year. He was there and he was highly ranked. Scotty Renee, Hardell Moore, Mark Smith, a lot of these guys that were, of course, Eric. A lot of those guys had the expectation of national championship. And it was for me, it was easy to look across the room because if I looked across the room, I knew what I needed to do to win a national championship. And I was just trying to keep up with those guys. My freshman year, it was about surviving, like surviving practice every day, surviving the workouts, the runs, the lifts, all of those sort of things. My freshman year, it was just about surviving and learning what the process was. And then as time wore on and I found success, I started realizing that leadership role that I had to play.
What was your takeaway from being a true freshman, 1996 NCAA tournament? I believe, Teague, you went 1-2. What do you
Yeah.
remember from that? What was most valuable in that experience?
Um, I, I remember leaving, that was Minneapolis. I remember leaving the arena after my second loss. And I just remember thinking, this is never going to happen again. Like, I'm never going to leave this building without a title in my hand. And so it was tough. It was a tough tournament to watch because my teammates were doing extremely well. Mark Branch made the finals that year and he tore his ACL in the finals match against Darrell Weber from Iowa. Eric made the All-American stand. That Eric's placement really proved to me that I'm capable of doing that. I always had this weird history in my career. In high school, Mark Engel was a training partner of mine and a good friend. He found success at the junior nationals, and that kind of showed me I could succeed at that level, right? In college, it was Eric because he was my training partner. He found success, and it was kind of like it reassured me that I was capable of doing that as well. And so walking away from that 96 nationals with a bitter taste in my mouth, I truly lived wrestling that whole summer. I lived in Stillwater. I trained every single day, spent 2 weeks over in South Korea training with their national team. And I made a huge jump from that freshman year to my sophomore year.
You've been around this sport for so long, Teague. I mean, it was basically, you were born with it in your blood. High school, college, international, coaching. You've been around some of the great wrestling minds in the world. What separates, or what did you learn separated good from great?
That's a great question. I think I learned early on. My dad, who never wrestled and was really, he drove my brother and I to the success that we had. He always sought out the best that he could find for us. So whether it was the high school coach at North Allegheny, a Hall of Fame coach, Gus DiAugustino, he actually moved our family so that we could be around Gus. And Gus had that different mentality, right? He was a 1952 Olympic alternate himself. Pursuing college, following John Smith and learning under John Smith, even during camps and clinics growing up. I went to the Jay Robinson 28-day camps growing up. So I was around Jay, who had that mindset. Really, I think what separates those guys from the average or even the good is that those guys are willing to go above and beyond in all aspects to achieve success. They will train harder, they will study more, they will do the little things that the average wrestler or the average coach is not willing to do. And so over the years, I think that was one thing that I took on just from my upbringing. I saw people that had that success. Obviously, having a brother in the house that had the high school success that he did, I saw what it took to do that. And then as I moved on into the international career, when John Smith is telling you, you need to clean up your technique and you need to manage this part of your life a little bit better, you listen, you learn, and then you do it, right? And I think that was what made the difference for me in my wrestling career is that I was willing to listen to the tough critiques from those type of people and then willing to implement the changes into my life. And when I did, I normally found success.
What's the toughest critique John Smith ever gave you? A heart-to-heart, impactful, direct critique.
Um, so there was the time in college where this was during my freshman year. I was not having the success that he felt I was capable of, right? And I think that was the key. His expectation of where he believed I should be wrestling and where I thought I should be wrestling, they were at two different places. And so he gave me a very tough, but a very sincere and a very honest um, talk about what I needed to do to change my wrestling, right? And it was more about the effort. Like he would always say to me, you know the takedowns, you know the setups, you know how to ride on top, you can get out from bottom from anybody. So you have all the tools that you need. So why don't you just go out and use those and make them work for you? Stop trying to do things that they're not your style of wrestling or they're not what you're best at. Just stick with what you do extremely well and find a way to make it work, right? Um, the words and the energy that he passed that along to me with was a lot more intense than what I just gave. And it was a lot more direct. Um, it would probably make a lot of parents cringe. It would probably make a lot of wrestlers crumble, but he was very honest. And that was something I got from my family growing up. Being the youngest of seven, we had to be tough. We battled each other in the house for the little things that you needed to do. And we were all very competitive. So the home that I was brought up in, it wasn't much different from the Oklahoma State way and the Oklahoma State mentality. And Coach Smith, being from a large Catholic family himself, he was one of 10, I was one of seven, and our families are both devout Catholic families. That I think allowed him to speak to me and bring me up in a way that he could be a little bit more harsh with me, but I knew he was doing it for my own good. I knew he was doing it to bring the best out of me, and I trusted that, right? And so over time, I learned to realize that speech that he gave me that freshman year is also what helped catapult me into that sophomore year.
You have a favorite John Smith corner story?
Um, Man, it's been a while. There were al there were always I can't think of anything specific. Um, but whether it was my college career or it was my international career, because he cornered me up through my completion through 2004 when I was wrestling for Gator Club. Um, some things I probably, I can't repeat on a podcast, but he always had a way of waking me up and getting me to see the reality in the moment, right? Like if I was in a tight bout and I needed to put a ride on for the next 30 seconds, he made it very clear and very direct that this is what had to happen and this is what I was going to succeed in that next 30 seconds. So go get it done, right? And I can't recall anything too crazy at this point. I'm sure if I really dove back into it, there were a lot of times that he would say things you would expect, right? Like he's going to give this very elaborate, because of his success, he's going to give this explanation of what needs to happen, and it's going to be very colorful and uh, but he was never like that. Everything was extremely direct as to what needed to happen. If you needed to go score a takedown, he was telling you in the next 30 seconds, you need to score the next takedown. Stop standing around and expecting this guy to just give you a takedown. You have to go out and take it, right? This was probably not a corner story, but as I was going out for my national championship in 1998, um, it was basically like one sentence. He came up to me, smacked me as he would normally do before I went out onto the mat, and he said, "This is your time. This is your national championship. So go get it." Um, and that was all I needed.
Let's talk about that final in 98. First, we'll go to 97. I mean, you four-time qualifier, three-time All-American. In 97, you take fourth. What do you remember from that journey, and what was it like being on the stand?
97 was it is a tournament that I have forgotten and I like to black out. I made it to the semifinals and I was wrestling an opponent from Iowa who I had just beaten at the national duels just a few weeks
And that was
before.
Jesse Whitmer, correct?
Yeah, Jesse Whitmer, he ended up winning the tournament that year, and he had an incredible run at that nationals. And I had beat him fairly convincingly at the national duels, takedowns, riding, like I held all the positions really well. But at that nationals in the semifinals, if you remember, that was Gable's last run. It was like it was everything was falling right where Iowa needed it to. And even though Oklahoma State, we had the better dual season and we were the better team, I believe, um, going into that national championships, I didn't perform. I went out into that semifinals match. I expected things to happen for me that weren't happening and took some bad shots. He did some easy go behinds to get some takedowns, and I found myself in a losing position. I battled back for third place and ended up wrestling a guy that I looked up to for many years, Sheldon Thomas, who was a national champion in '96, and I wrestled him for third place and I ended up losing. And I remember just having such a bad taste in my mouth after that tournament that I had done all this work. My dad had actually passed away right at the beginning of that season. So it was a really kind of bumpy ride for me throughout that sophomore campaign. But I remember leaving that tournament thinking, I lost to a guy in the semis that I absolutely should have beat. I know I could have won the finals match had I gotten there. And then in my third and fourth place match, Sheldon is very good and was very good, but I didn't feel like I gave my best effort on that match. We ended up wrestling at the 2000 Olympic trials, and I beat Sheldon at those 2000 trials. And I just remember when I left that sophomore year, leaving UNI where the nationals were, I just knew that there was the next year I was not walking away without a national championship. And fortunately, that happened.
What were the biggest differences in being atop the podium and being on another step?
I think it really came down to lifestyle changes. My junior year, I was living with a cross country runner, All American, a guy named Chuck Sloan, who ran at Oklahoma State, and we just had a really good environment. He and I were both up early. Um, we were either going to workouts or we also went regularly to weekday masses in Stillwater. And so I just think there was a good, we just had a good vibe going together. I knew what his goals were on the cross country course and on the track, and he knew what my goals were on the wrestling mat. We both we both admired what each other did in our sports, and we respected each other. So things in the house, we took care of one another so that we could both be at our best. And I think that really was the big difference for me that junior year. It was just a lifestyle change, and it wasn't that I did things much different than my sophomore year or my senior year, but it was just that piece of the living day to day that helped me succeed on the mat.
How did you end up having him as a roommate?
We became friends in the dorms our freshman year, and then we did a lot of stuff outside of the dorms together, and so we just developed a good relationship. And when the opportunity came up, when we were looking for places to live, my end of my freshman year, in my sophomore year, I ended up living with our 190 pounder, a guy named Aaron Strobel, and Chuck would come over to our house pretty frequently. Aaron graduated and moved on, so I needed a new roommate. Chuck and I found a house right by Gallagher Iba. I was like 2 blocks from Gallagher Iba. So it made my commute to practices really easy. I could literally just walk to practice each day. So it was good for both of us in that sense.
Getting a pin in the national finals, you pinned David Morgan in 1998. I mean, that doesn't happen often. Falls in the finals. What do you remember from hearing the slap of the Reslite and knowing you finally would stand atop the podium as a national champ at Oklahoma State?
Um, Again, kind of a surreal feeling. David and I had gone back and forth a number of times. We wrestled my freshman year. He beat me all 3 times we wrestled. We wrestled 3 times my sophomore year. I beat him all 3 times we wrestled our sophomore year, my sophomore year. That junior year, we met in a dual meet, and he beat me up pretty good. I think he beat me 8-4 or maybe 10-4. It was like on the verge of a major. He rode, if you remember correctly, David Morgan was just an absolute beast on top. He rode me and turned me really well. So I knew going into the finals match, I wanted to set the pace early, set the tempo and set the pace. And God willing, when the match started, I was able to get right to a comfortable tie-up position, and I got to an inside trip that led to near fall. So I was up 5-0 within the first like 30 seconds. And then the match kind of got into a wrestling match. He started battling his way back. If anybody watches that match on YouTube, there's a weird exchange. He ends up getting a reversal, and then he pulls me to my back and gets near fall. But they also stop it and they penalize him one point because it slips into a figure four, and he figure forward my waist. And I always thought, even in the moment, I remember questioning the ref and saying, "How is he getting near fall if it's an illegal figure four?" And he says, "Well, he slipped into the figure four, So he got near fall and then he fell into that position. So before you know it, I'm in like a 1 point match. And fortunately for me, my mentality at that moment was like, I don't care what the scoreboard says. I need one more point than him. And I think that ultimately really helped me in that match because if I had looked at it and said, okay, I'm up by 5, and then the next thing I know, it's a 6 or it's a 5-4 match, I might have let that start to wrestle in my head, but I didn't. My whole thing was like, whenever this match ends, I'm going to be 1 point ahead of him, and that's all that matters. And then late in the second period, I end up getting to a low single, a position that Coach Smith worked on us. The finish, he worked on us all the time. And it's a unorthodox position. You get to a low single, you bring the guy upside down, what like MMA people would now call north south. So he's upside down in the air. He locks my free arm to my body. So he's upside down and he locks a body lock. As he did that, Coach Smith would teach us when they lock you in that position, your arms in the lock, but then trap that to your own body. So lock their lock to you, take him backwards. Now he's on his back. And the one thing coach would always say in that position is you have to be patient. When you put an opponent on your back, but you haven't been awarded points yet, be patient and be confident in the position. And so we worked a lot of hip heist turnout positions from there. So when I got David Morgan there, I remember thinking like, I can make him panic and he's going to release and I'm going to get the takedown, right? But in that position, we were there long enough and I was able to keep him in that position long enough that the referee went down and looked, and sure enough, he was flat and he made the call. And I just remember in the moment, I remember looking at the official and saying, was that a fall? And he either nodded yes or said yes. And then everything was kind of a blur after that.
Did you take the mat to music? I don't remember that far back. We're getting old. I mean, did you pick like your walkout song and all that stuff?
No,
You
no,
did.
they didn't have any of that sort of stuff at that time. The only thing I remember about that was the NCAA when they briefed us on this is what's going to happen pre-finals. So we would do the walkout. If you remember, they would do the parade like they still do now, take all the guys up on the mat. They also brought out all the old NCAA champions. So they would do a parade of those older guys. This whole thing took like 45 minutes, and you're getting ready for a national championship standing for 45 minutes. David Morgan opted to not take part in it. So he didn't do the parade of All Americans prior to. He wasn't standing there while all of the old NCAA champions were introduced. And so I took that at that moment in time when he wasn't going through all of that. I felt like that was an advantage to me because I said, if he's not wanting to go through this and absorb this experience for what it is, we're only going to do it maybe one time in our life, right? I remember thinking he's thinking about our match. He's nervous about how this match is going to go. And so I tried to use it as a positive. And I don't know what he was thinking. He might have just been thinking, I don't want to stand on my feet for 45 minutes. But I tried to get myself to believe he's nervous about this match. So that's an advantage to me.
Was it Sandy Stevens that announced you as the national champ?
Sandy
And Ed?
and Ed Oliveri, yeah,
Yes.
they were on the call there at those nationals. So, and that's kind of for me. I'm 48 now. When I look back on those two voices of wrestling through the 80s and 90s, not only for the NCAAs, but also for international wrestling. So I heard them make calls at international events. I heard them make calls at previous NCAA championships. So when I heard them making announcements with my name, that was pretty special for me.
That is fantastic. Teague, I say this all the time, and you once again, as I'm looking at your career, I'm like, what a shocker. I love the national championship stories. They're great. But the stories that hit me harder are the reigning national champ the devastating loss the next year in the semifinals.
Yeah.
And that's where we find out we're made of, and you take third.
Yeah.
I mean, it's though that's to me, Teague, more impressive than the championship run based on the circumstances of that time. Coming back and taking third. Walk us through that. What did you learn about yourself that day?
Um, it's interesting. Here we are, what is that? 99, 2024. So that's like 25 years ago.
Quarter
This past
century.
weekend, this past weekend, my girlfriend who has a daughter at Penn State, her youngest is a sophomore at Penn State. We're going up there to celebrate her daughter's birthday. And as we're driving up, the signs start popping up, Rice Jordan Center. And I said to my girlfriend, I can't believe it's been a quarter of a century since I ended my college career here at Penn State, right? So even 25 years later, anytime I'm going to State College and I see the Bryce Jordan Center, I get this knot in my stomach, right? Um, so to your question, that match is a really tough one to swallow. I have Stephen Abbas, who Stephen and I had battled at the junior nationals. We had battled through college, both of us earning wins at different times. Um, but that semifinals match is an odd one. You can find it on YouTube. I every now and then I'll watch it, but it's a tough one to watch. I lost 3-3. And so for wrestling fans back in those days, when you finished regulation, you went for, I believe it was a 2-minute overtime. If nobody scored, the referee flipped a disc. Whoever won the toss picked top or bottom, and it was a 30-second go. At the end of 30 seconds, if you were on bottom and you got away or you scored, you won. If you were on top and you rode them out, you won. And so it's 3-3. And Steven and I, we knew each other pretty well, but we also wrestled extremely hard against each other anytime we competed. So we get to that 30-second ride out, flip of the disc, I win the toss, I choose down, and he dropped to my ankle. The first time they called stalemate. The second time they called stalling. And then in the last reigning seconds, he dropped to the ankle. I was trying to kick free, couldn't get out, and he ended up winning the match there. So that was a tough one, right? It was in my home state of Pennsylvania. So lots of friends and family there. Really where I felt like I wanted to end my college career was a national championship at Penn State, but it didn't happen. And so the only thing I can look at it from a positive standpoint, it really fueled me to go into the international circuit because I felt like at that time, guys like Sammy Henson were winning world championships. So at our weight class, at one point in time, Sammy had won a senior world championship. Steven had won a junior world championship. In 2000, I won what was called the University World Championships. It was 24 and under. And so from our eight in our weight class in our country, we had three world champions that were all trying to make the 2000 Olympic team. Um, so we were really good. And I think that loss at Penn State, it helped me in a positive way catapult me to where I wanted to go on the world scene. And I didn't have the world success that I wanted because I wanted to be an Olympic champion. I wanted to be a multiple time world champion. I'm very fortunate and blessed that I won that university world championships when I was 24. But I feel like the loss at Penn State my senior year is what really allowed me to go on to the international circuit because I was still hungry, right? I hadn't got the results that I wanted in high school. So I felt like I needed to prove myself internationally. And it probably drove me, I won a silver at the World Cup. I won a lot of big international competitions, like Yazır Dogu, which is one of the biggest international tournaments in the world. Beat the eventual Olympic silver medalist or maybe gold medalist when
From
Cejudo.
Japan?
Yeah, the guy from Japan that Cejudo beat, I beat him at Yezer Dogu. And so I really felt like that end of my college career, because it ended like it did help positively affect me in my international career. So
At that time in that tournament at Penn State in '99, when you suffer that tough defeat to Abbas, what do you remember thinking? I mean, you're the reigning national champion. What do you remember thinking? What was the difference in your mindsets and ultimately performance, saying, hey, we're getting third place. We're getting the next best thing? Because Teague, as we all know, that would have been an easy time to say, like, this is not what I came here for, and I'm going to let that get inside my head and steer me in a certain direction.
yeah, Coach Smith had a really nice thing to say at that national championships afterwards, because we once again were number one ranked team all year long, and we fell short there at Penn State, and we ended up third. We almost fell out of medal contention because we had a couple of guys like myself and Mark Smith. We fell short and didn't get the points that were needed. So to your question, what was I saying to myself? I in my head, I was always saying, I hate folk style. I have a personal dislike of folk style wrestling. I don't like the rules. I don't like the way that officials involve themselves in so many collegiate matches, right? I prefer freestyle, right? So at the time at Penn State, I remember just thinking, I'm so glad I'm done with this crap. I don't ever have to wrestle folk style again, right? And Coach Smith, I was not a good loser. Um, like I almost got kicked out of the national championships the junior year, the year that I won it. I had won a match early on. I got in some trouble because I kicked the table and broke some stuff. I wasn't happy with the way that I got a win early in that tournament. And so after my senior year at Penn State, Coach Smith said, you know, if Teague had not battled back and gotten third for us, we might not be taking this trophy home. And yes, there's 9 other guys that were winning points for us at this tournament, but there was a critical turning point when I lost that semis. I came back Saturday morning, and let me tell you, Shane, if there was a time in my life I didn't want to make weight and put my wrestling shoes on again, it was that senior year at Penn State when you knew you weren't going to repeat as an NCAA champion. So it took a lot of humility to make weight and then go out and compete. In the first match that I'm wrestling that morning, I go out. I believe his name was Moses Delphine from Bakersfield. He got out on an early lead. Like he was beating me either 4-0 or 5-0 pretty quickly. And I can remember it was one of those moments where coach gave me a wake up call during that match. Like, hey, this is real. You're actually doing this. If you're going to give this match away, it not only has implications for you, but the team race is on the line. And so he brought me back to reality with whatever words he used at that time. And Mark Perry, our assistant, was also good at doing to that for me in the corner. And so I was able to pull that match back in and I got the victory. And then for third and fourth, if I remember correctly, I wrestled Shane Valdez from the University of Oklahoma, who we had wrestled 13 previous times. That was our 14th match in college that we were going to be wrestling for that third place. And so I went out, got the job done, and ended up third. And so that whole experience there at Penn State, the only way I can describe it is it just left a really bad taste in my mouth. And all I wanted to do was start to get ready for 2000 in the Olympics.
Give us that story again about you with the table. I remember, I believe it was Andy Hamilton, Kyle Klingman. I was sitting there. It was at the national tournament years back, but you told that story. Give me that one again.
So in my opening round in 98, I'm wrestling Steve Garland, the now head coach at Virginia. And we knew as a team, Oklahoma State, every bout and bonus point mattered. So when you step out there, when the whistle blows, like our goal is to get the 8 point lead and then build on that. And we either get the fall or we get the pin, right? So in my mind, like I need 8 points on Steve Garland the moment that whistle blows. Well, the way that the match played out, I kept building a lead, but then he would sneak his way back into the match. He would find a reversal, he would find a takedown on the edge. And so my lead kept going as like a 5 point lead, then a 3 point lead, then a 6 point lead, then a 4 point lead, right? And when the match ended, I had only won by decision. And this is no secret. I had a temper. And so I was so infuriated that he was able to keep that match close to me. And Steve jokingly told me this later on. He said, I don't know if you remember this, but during that match, he said, you put a power half on me. And he said, I don't think you were trying to turn me. I think you were trying to tear my arm off. And he said, I yelled and the referee called injury time. And he said, you got down really close to my ear by my headgear. And you said, I'm taking your arm home with me. Right. And so when the match ended and I didn't have the bonus points that I knew our team needed for us to win that title, I came off the mat. It was super tight in Cleveland. Like there was no room from where the mat ended and where the tables for press row started. There was no space. And I just remember kicking the first thing that was in sight, which was a table. And in 1998, when I kicked that table, there was a laptop on it. Laptops were not like very readily available, right? And this laptop went up off the table and then boom down onto the ground. And so I finished my match, finished my cool down. They take me back. Pat Smith takes me back to the hotel. So now I've got an evening session I got to get ready for. So I'm sleeping or doing whatever, and the phone rings, and Pat says, Teager, I got to come pick you up. You have to get in front of a committee. They're deciding if they're going to kick you out of the tournament. And anybody that knows Pat was a practical joker. And so I just said, Pat, like, let me rest. 10 minutes later, there's a knock at the door. It's Pat. He's like, let's go. I got to get you back over. Like, he's like, this was not good what you did. You're in for it. So now I'm like, oh crap, right? I feel like you remember when you were a little kid and you got in trouble and now you're just waiting for your parents
Waiting
to
for
like.
dad to come home.
So we drive over to the arena. They take me down into the belly of the arena and they said the tournament committee's here and they're going to vote to eliminate you from the tournament or allow you to stay in. You're going to get to go in and say what happened. And I remember coach just being like, you really put yourself in a tough one here. He's like, I don't know what's going to happen here. I don't know that I can help you in this situation, but you need to just go in and tell them what happened. So I went in, and if I remember, there was like 15 or 20 people in this committee meeting. And so I ran through the scenario. Look, here's what happened. I was frustrated. I came off the mat. I kicked the first thing that was around me. I didn't realize there was a laptop on the table. I didn't do it on purpose, but if I have to replace that, um, then I'll do that. And I just don't want to lose this opportunity. And Bruce Baumgartner, who my family had known, I had an older sister that went to school at Edinburgh. So when I was a little kid and we would go to see Colleen at Edinburgh, I would run around the gymnasium, right, or the youth tournaments there, and Bruce Baumgartner was there. And so he knew our family, and he had known me as a little kid growing up. And Bruce said to the committee, like, we've heard his point of view on this. We understand what, the tournament, how the tournament needs to happen, and that this is unacceptable. But I've known him and I know this isn't his nature. And I think if we give him this opportunity to come back into the tournament, we're not going to have an issue with that. And of course, I said, absolutely not. You won't have to worry about anything the rest of the tournament for me. And so they sent me out of the room and they took a vote. And I was told by one vote, I stayed in the tournament. And so that was the national tournament that I almost didn't get to earn.
Wow. Wow. That's a great story. That's a great story. Teague, if you had to talk to yourself as an 18-year-old heading to Oklahoma State, right now, as a 48-year-old, what would you tell that 18-year-old Teague Moore about what was coming and how to handle it?
Um, that's a great question. I would probably say embrace what you're about to do because the environment that you're going to is extremely special and extremely unique. If you truly want to be the best of the best, this is the environment you need to be in. What you are going to have to do to become the best of the best is going to be very difficult, but you will survive it and you will overcome it. There's not going to be a lot of easy days. There's going to be a challenge every single day, and you need to embrace that. The other thing I would tell myself is don't worry about the other things. And the other things are like, I was always kind of consumed with like, it was a different world, a different time. I was always concerned about like having finances. I never wanted to ask my mom and dad for anything. So I always had an expectation of like, I need to figure out how I'm going to make money to pay rent. I'm going to need to figure out how I need to do these things so I can go and do what I need to do, right? In looking back on it, I wish I didn't have to. I worried so much about going and doing clinics to make extra money so that I had money in my account so that I could do things I wanted to do or needed to do. I would have probably just said trust the environment and what's going on there. If you need money to train, Oklahoma State will figure that out. I didn't have that mentality at that time. I was still trying to figure out my own way. Um, and that and just enjoy the ride. Like it's going to be very difficult, but try to enjoy it. Because it only happens once. You're only going to get to go through this one time. They're some of the most memorable moments in my entire life. Were those years at Oklahoma State. I trained and competed there in 4 years. And then I left and I was an assistant at Pitt. I was an assistant at Oklahoma. And then I went back to Oklahoma State for 2004. So that was really good for me because I did it as a college student. Then I got away from it, got to come back to it and realize how special it was, how different it was from other collegiate programs. And I would most likely just tell myself, don't sweat the small stuff. It's going to work itself out.
Excuse me. Teague, most memorable moment in Gallagher Iba.
Um, oh man. Um, there were so many. That's really tough. Um, the Bedlam duels were always really fun to be a part of. Fun for us. I was on the Oklahoma State side at that time. I think we won 7 of the 8 duels in those 4 years because you wrestle Oklahoma twice every year. Um, so the Bedlam duels were really good. Good memories there. Um, maybe the match against David Morgan, who I beat for the Nationals. When my father passed in '96, I went home for the funeral, went through that whole process, came back to Oklahoma State. It was 10 days after my dad had passed, and I had David Morgan, who was ranked number 2 in the country. I was ranked 15th, and I not only won that match in that dual meet, but we ended up blanking Michigan State in that duel. And I feel like a lot of that energy, I was the first one out there, and I get this really big win after my team knew what an emotional 2 weeks I had had. So that may be the most memorable for me was that moment of getting that win. That was my sophomore year, and getting that win over on number 2 proved to me like I'm here, I'm ready to do this. So
You lost your father in college. I was fortunate. My dad passed away 6 years ago, but I was, 42 years old, got some good time. Obviously, it's very well documented, Teague, the story of your brother, Ty. If you could talk to Ty, and I'll throw this at Ty and your dad, if you had an
mhm.
hour to spend with those guys, what would you want to talk about?
Um, that's interesting you say that because I talk to them pretty frequently. Um, I think if they were here physically and I could sit down and have a conversation with them, I would probably talk to my dad about just raising kids. He raised 7 kids. He worked for the post office, retired from the post office. My mom stayed at home to raise the kids. They went through some really, really difficult and tough times. I think that would be helpful for me. I know I've shared with you, and some people know this, but I went through a very difficult divorce in 2021. So I would love to hear my dad's wisdom on that situation. Talking to Ty, um, I don't know. I don't know what I would ask him. I would probably ask him why he, you know, made the decisions that he made at the end. But on a lighthearted note, I would probably, I don't know, we ribbed each other quite a bit, so I'd probably tell him he's missed out on quite a few things since his passing. So I don't know. Ty and I used to have a lot of fun together, just because obviously, the wrestling history was really good. All of the kids that he got to help, the Coleman Scotts, the Jake Herberts, the Phil Davises, like they all went on to have incredible. He coached, I think, in his club. He and Ray Bringer had a club. I think it was for 6 years, and out of those 6 years, they had 5 NCAA champions and 35 NCAA All-Americans come out of that 6 years that they had Angry Fish up and running. It was a very, very successful little club. And I think a lot of clubs kind of emulated them moving forward. So I'd probably, talk to him about that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
We call this the Go Earn It podcast. In your career, Teague, at any level, what was your, and maybe you've discussed it already, but what was your go earn it moment? How would you describe your go earn it moment as a wrestler, backs against the wall, and you had to learn something about yourself and just go earn it in a different capacity that maybe you had in the past?
Um, a go earn it moment. I like that. It would probably be the very first time I got to win what was considered a national championship. My sophomore year, season finished. My dad drove me out to Iowa. There was an AAU nationals out in Iowa. And I remember I made the finals. Normally growing up, I always had this, like, we had a little group. There was like 10 or 12 of us buddies. Almost everybody became NCAA All-Americans in college at different universities, but we usually traveled as a group. I went out to this tournament by myself. It was just my dad and I. And I remember going out onto the mat and I remember thinking, okay, I've won at a national championship. This is something my brother never did. And so this is my opportunity to win a national championship. And I remember thinking, I'm going to do whatever it takes in this 6 minutes to make sure that I bring home a title. And so things worked out well. I ended up getting my hand raised at the end of that. That was my first national championship. And then that summer, I won the junior nationals and then, won the junior nationals the summer after that. And then high school nationals and U20s and all of the Espoir nationals, as they called it back then. The national titles started to come year after year after that. But that very first one was that like do or die moment. I got to get this done. In all of my years of making national championship finals, um, I think I'm right on this. I only lost one national championship, and that was to Cody Sanderson at the University Nationals after my senior year of college. I bumped up a weight, made it to the finals, and was wrestling Cody, and ended up losing a tight match to him. But the other 9 national championships at different age groups or variations, I was able to win those. So fortunate. But I think the attitude and mentality that I went into a lot of those finals matches with was because it was kind of a do or die. Like I've got the opportunity to put another title on my resume or behind my name. This dude's not taking it from me. Like I'm ready to give um, My brother used to beat me up quite a bit when I was growing up. Younger brothers can probably relate to this, especially wrestling families. He would, we would get into fights, and he was older than me. He would always beat me up, but he would front headlock me and he would choke me until like I pass out, right? And when I would come to, he would always say something like, "Quit your crying, like you're gonna be fine. They do this in judo all the time," right? And so when I would go out to matches, it was like, I'm gonna do whatever it takes to win this match. It's like Ty's choking me, and I'm gonna do whatever I can to get out of this because this guy's not as big and as strong as my brother is, right? So
That is great.
again, I don't know how that just came off over the podcast. Some parents may listen to that and think that's appalling, but like
I love it.
this was my upbringing, right? So it was,
Absolutely.
as I had said earlier, it was a rough upbringing. Like you had to be very tough in our house. My sisters used to beat the crap out of me all the time. So you had to be very tough. And so that was just part of my makeup.
Are you up against the Teague, or you got a few more minutes?
I got a few more minutes.
What match in your career, not necessarily the most disappointing, and maybe it was even a win, what match taught you the most?
Um, it was probably w w I can't remember what year this was. I think it was my sophomore year. And I had this huge contusion on my leg. We had gone to the national duels. We had a good national duels run my sophomore year. And I had this bone contusion on my shin. And it was like, it was about the size of a quarter. And if if I pushed my thumb in on it, like a portion of the bone, it would just go in, right? And it was so incredibly painful. I mean, just brutally painful. And my trainer at Oklahoma State at the time, he took a piece of plastic, they heated a piece of plastic, formed it to my shin, and then he put padding of foam around that with the center cut out. So that way, when he put it on the injury, it was kind of like a donut around that injury. And then they would tape that up. And it was on my shin, so they had to tape it pretty tight so that it didn't slide during the match. Well, we had gone to the national duels. I wrestled with it. It was kind of frustrating because I didn't have like full explosive power in my calf because of it, because this thing was taped on so tight. But the week after, we go to Iowa State and I'm wrestling Cody Sanderson in the duel. And I just remember the pain of my shin, and I believe my shoulder was also wrecked at that time. Not to the point where it needed surgery, but it was like one of those injuries where you're like, I got to really buck up when I step out on this mat. Like I got to be ready to fight through this pain. And during that match, I can remember I was in tears because my shin was hurting, my shoulder was hurting. You're wrestling Cody Sanderson, right? Like you got to be on your game. And I remember just thinking when the match ended, I won the match. I just remember thinking, I think I can do anything I need to do when I go out to compete. Like I can overcome it mentally in terms of physical pain or what I have to do to be able to win a match. I believe I can do that because I'm sure most people would probably not have decided to go out and wrestled with the type of contusion that I had on my shin, the pain that I had in my shoulder. I don't think most people would say, yeah, I'm now gonna step out on a mat against one of the top ranked 118 pounders who also wants to beat the crap out of me, right? I'll probably just sit this week out and see how I feel next week. But that wasn't the mentality at Oklahoma State, and that definitely wasn't the upbringing that I was brought with. I always felt like I had four really good backups behind me at Oklahoma State. Three of them became All-Americans the next 3 years after I'd finished. I always felt like they were out for my job, right? So if I wasn't wrestling, they got an opportunity to start. If they get an opportunity to start and they get a good run going, is coach going to see them as a probable starter? Is he potentially going to switch me out of that position? So like I said earlier in the podcast, I felt like me holding that position was like my job. and anybody that wanted to take it from me was going to have to pry it from my dead, cold hands. So
You talked about it before a little bit with the folk style, freestyle. What's something within the sport of wrestling, and this could be anything, Teague, but because you've been around this for so long in so many different capacities, what's something within the sport that will fire you up immediately? Like a certain topic, a debate, like what's something that gets you from 0 to 60 like that?
um riding time. I despise it. I don't know what we're thinking or how we're thinking it promotes the sport. It literally, by its definition, is causing wrestlers to not try and score more points. They're trying to build their riding time, right? And so I just feel like, as I said earlier, I'm just not a huge fan of folk style, right? I don't think we need 3 periods. I think we could wrestle folk style in 1 period, in 1 5-minute match. Um, I feel like we've created a rules structure that in the big situations, it really forces guys to be conservative as opposed to going out and wrestling wide open, which is where I think freestyle, there's more of a wide open, like I'm going to get rewarded for the opportunities that I take. Well, in folk style, like we don't get me wrong, we've made some good changes. The change to the 3-point takedown, I think, was needed because I can't tell you how many times it was like going back to my Steve Garland story. With the old rules, if I go out, get a takedown, cut him, he gives no energy to get cut, but he gets a point. He gets half of what I earned in a takedown. I take him down again, it's 4. I cut him. He's now got 2 points. I've got 4 points, and I worked for 2 takedowns. He did nothing to get 2 escapes. If I make a mistake and he finds himself on top, the match is now 4-4. Yet I worked for 2 takedowns. He maybe worked for 1, or maybe he slipped into it, right? And now it's an even score. I'm like, that doesn't equate, right? I like freestyle where you can go out and score the points, and if the referee feels the need that action's got to come back up to your feet, they don't get awarded for that, right? And so for me, it's right now it's the riding time. There's a litany of other things. For some wrestling fans, about a decade ago, when we got booted out of the Olympics, a very good friend of mine, a business partner of mine, we put an event on in Pittsburgh. It was called First to 10, right? And the premise of it was, let's take wrestling matches, take away the clock. So now there is no clock, there are no periods. The matches started and finished based on the points of points scored. First 1 to 10 wins, right? And so there were so many people I would debate this with. I'm like, what if we didn't have periods and we didn't have a clock? And everybody's like, what are you talking about? Like, nobody's ever seen wrestling without a clock. Well, we tried it and it was a success, right? It was one of those business ventures that I've tried that I really feel like had different things happened in a different time frame, I may have just continued to pursue that. But I did. Like, we did the first one, it was a test run. We had 2 more planned. We had another one planned for Washington, D.C. and Pittsburgh. And my brother Ty passed away at that time. And I just never really regained the energy to try and get it going again. But that's something about wrestling that bothers me. I don't like wrestling too very athletic, very, you know, opportunistic wrestlers take to the mat and then go out there and stand there for 7 minutes. In college wrestling, it just drives me absolutely nuts.
Would you agree, Teague, that if the scoring at dual meets was different, all of that would be solved for? I've
Yeah.
always thought that maybe the craziest thing in wrestling is I beat you 7-0, and the guy after me loses 1-0, and it's 3-3 on the team scoreboard.
Yeah.
Like, I've always thought it'd be cool to do, like, I'm going to take us back to 1998, and at that time you always went first. But let's say on this particular night, in 1998 you were going last, and let's say we're on a TV broadcast, I would love to say one match to go, Teague Moore and the Cowboys down by 17. Like, can you imagine how different you would wrestle? Like, and I think that would solve, because you know me, Teague. I love folk style wrestling. I mean, I love it. I like the riding time. I'm a little bit of a grinder, even though I understand and respect your thoughts. But I've always thought if you change that rule set on team scoring, it solves for itself. Like, you want to ride for 35 seconds or do whatever and not score any points or build towards 1 point, that's fine. But that's not going to help your team when you're down by 32, which also would be attainable. I mean, when you got some of the superstars like you did on your team, you know, you might be down by, I mean, probably you guys were too good for this, but you get the point. Like, now you guys, you better find another gear and take some more risks. What are your thoughts on that?
I totally agree. I think there's a lot of different ways that we could format the dual portion of our sport and make it more exciting. And I know there's a lot of people out there that would argue with both of us right now and say, hey, what we got, we're packing 18,000 seat arenas for these duels, right? In the big programs. And it's pretty exciting. Okay, that may be true. If we looked at the collective of the sport, yes, there is a small fraction that are really exciting and they come down to the last matches. It's a barn burner, right? But if we change, just like you had mentioned, if we changed the scoring format, because there is disparity right now, it doesn't make sense to me why somebody who wins a 7-0 match is equally on the scoreboard the same as a 1-0 match, right? So I think there are some things that could change that could make the duels more exciting. I think they could engage the fans a lot more than what we do right now. Look, I'm just a wrestling fan right now. I live in Washington, or just outside of Washington, D.C. So I've got Navy, I've got Morgan State, I've got George Mason, I've got American, I've got these Division Ones all within driving distance. University of Maryland. So I can go see 5 teams compete Division One. I'll be the first one to tell you, like, I show up at some of these duels, and in 3 or 4 matches, I'm a diehard wrestling fan, and I'm like, I'm ready to check out, right? I definitely think there's ways that we could tweak the sport, and make the duels a little bit more exciting. Because right now, a lot of times they're duds. You go to see 2 college teams compete, and for whatever reason, sometimes it's just not exciting from the fan perspective of, do we have a chance to win? Can we win? And the fact that you have, one guy go out. So here's another thing that bothers me. You have somebody on your team that has a big match, and we know the importance of it. They go out, it's a barn burner, something crazy happens, and they pin them. Boom, he gets a fall, right? That is huge. The very next match, for some reason, somebody on your team didn't weigh in. Their guy walks out. It's equal. It's 6-6. We just totally lost. Like, I feel like there should be a penalty for forfeiting. If you've got an opening in your lineup, I think you should be penalized for it, whether it's, a pin plus 2 points, however we work it out. But I think there's different ways. There's some anticlimactic situations in wrestling duels right now. I think team duels, if it's tied at the end of regulation, I think all 10 wrestlers should have to come back out, and you either wrestle 1 minute, right? So overtime is basically 10 minutes of wrestling. Each weight class gets 1 minute of overtime, cumulative scoring at the team. It makes no sense that we just wrestled a dual meet that every match supposedly counted, right? Every match. And then the referee goes over to the loudspeaker and says, in criterion number 4, such and such team wins because of near fall. And all the fans kind of look at each other, who watch football, who watch basketball, who watch all these other sports, even, hockey, like, they've figured out a way to make the overtime exciting. But in wrestling, it is a dud, right? It's a tied team score. And then we go to a rule book and say, yep, you won. And that's it. Everyone packs up and goes home.
Okay. Good thoughts, Teague. Good thoughts. Final question for you. If Teague Moore is going from DC out to California in a car, it's you and three people that you've never met, dead or alive. What three people is Teague Moore taking cross country? I got you in that front headlock right now, like your
Yeah.
brother used to put you in.
Wait. Did I hear that? They got to be wrestling people?
No,
Oh
anybody,
my.
dead or alive that you've never met. If you got to take three people, who would you
Do
take?
Okay. I got some other questions. Is there going to be a communication barrier?
Let's say
Like
no.
so
We can make our own
so
rules. No
okay. So
communication
we
barrier.
can communicate. Okay.
Yes, yes,
So these are really good ones. I think I'm going to go with like Alexander the Great. I'm going to go with I get three of them.
yes. Yep.
Alexander the Great, probably Abraham Lincoln. Um, I think so many people say this one, but I think it would be very interesting, like Jesus Christ, right? Um, if I get to do four, then I'm going to put Donald Trump in there as well. So if we're going 2,000 miles, it's got to be lively, right? But I think those would be some really good conversations. Might be able to figure out some things on that 2,000-mile journey.
That is
Are we staying
fantastic.
at hotels or are we camping along the way? Because I would probably rather say, okay, we're just going to camp on the way out.
Yeah, you make the rules. You make the
Okay.
rules. You can do some camping. I lied. One more quick question because you've been around so many great wrestling people. I'm going to put you on the spot, and maybe this is in my mind. I think I know where you're going to go with this. Um, the person that's had the biggest impact on your wrestling journey.
Um, Man, that is really tough. Like my brother Ty had a major impact on me just because that was who I spent the most time with, like early in my career. So all the way up till like 17 years old. He had a major influence on me. John Smith had a major influence on me, my time with him. As I mentioned, the summer times at the Jay Robinson camps were hugely influential into the way that I think about doing things. Jay Robinson didn't just teach wrestling at those 28-day intensive camps. He taught you to think about life and like succeeding and failing. And um, that was hugely influential. I got to be around Bob Bubb my 5 years at Clarion. I got to learn a lot from Coach Bubb. He was influential in my coaching career. Jack Davis, who was the assistant at Clarion, was hugely influential in my experience there. Yeesh. There's a lot. I even got to spend time with like Bela Glazov when he was coaching Team USA during that like 2003 era. Man, most influential, I'm gonna have to say Coach Smith because that was my college time. He influenced me with my international time. He influenced me my 20 years of coaching college wrestling. He had influence on me there. So I'd probably have to say in the end, it was probably Coach.
Who's your Mount Rushmore of wrestling with all the people you've been around, competed against? I mean, you've been around this sport for almost 5 decades. Who's your Mount Rushmore?
Are they Mount Rushmore of like only American wrestlers?
Teague Moore's Mount Rushmore. It's your Mount.
Four, if we're doing the same Mount Rushmore. So if it's four, it's going to be um, Belaglazov, uh, Satiev, John, and man, there's so many good ones. I always want to put Bumgardner in that list because I feel like Bruce does not get the kudos that he should. When I was at Harvard for 2 years, there was an old Soviet coach. It was actually Bela Glazov's youth coach. Um, and he had said to me at one point, we were having this discussion, and he said to me, Teague, everybody skips Bumgardner. Why? Why does America not? He is great, right? His run on the international scene is absolutely incredible. It, Olympic championships, world championships, and just the span that he did it. So that would probably be my list.
Teague, this was fantastic. This was great to catch up with you, go over your career, and just really appreciate the time. This was really enjoyed this. It was great.
Awesome. Thank you, Shane. I appreciate what you're doing for the sport, not just with this podcast, but like I love your announcing. I love your energy. I really feel like you are one of those people that have helped put wrestling into the new era. And I feel like we are at a peak right now for our sport. We still got a ways to go and we can still do some great things, but kudos to you for all you've done to help the sport. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. Let's do this again.
Sounds good. Take care.
Thanks, Teague.